For over 70 years, strange objects have been witnessed plunging into our oceans without a splash, hovering above both rough and calm waters, and even racing beneath the waves at impossible speeds. Navy pilots tracking tic tac shaped craft off of California's coast, Canadian officers investigating mysterious foam left by a submerged object in Shag Harbour, Hawaiian residents watching a glowing blue sphere descend slightly into the Pacific. These are all documented incidents, many confirmed by military radar, infrared cameras, and multiple trained observers. And what makes these cases so compelling? Well, unlike conventional aircraft, these objects seem equally at home in water as they are in the air, demonstrating what experts now call transmedium capabilities. From the Pentagon-verified USS Omaha footage showing spheres disappearing beneath the waves to New Jersey Coast Guardsmen that are tracking strange drones emerging from the Atlantic in 2024. So the evidence continues to pile up. I'm Cristina Gomez, and welcome to this episode of Mysteries with a History. Jimmy, happy Thursday. I know, almost choked
What are you
on that
doing?
water.
Why do you why do you do that now? Hey everybody, how you doing? See, I was cheating. I was drinking water instead of coffee. Now you should have caught me like this.
I should have, but whose fault is that?
Have you seen hello everybody. Hi Christina, it's great to be back. Have you seen, you probably haven't, you're not a big social media person. Have you seen, that was a joke. That's where you're supposed to laugh. Have you seen Have you seen the AI images that Chris has made of myself with ETs? Little Grace
No.
drinking coffee. Yeah, they're pretty
That
good.
sounds like fun.
They're pretty good. It's funny how Chat GPT, which I think that's what he's using, is obviously scraping older images of me because I don't have any gray. I've got shorter hair. Yeah, but they're pretty good. They're pretty good.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
I'll have to look at
they're
them
pretty
now.
good.
Now I'm
Yeah,
excited.
yeah, they're pretty good. They're pretty good. Anyway, there has been a lot of news of late, and a lot of chatter about USOs and submerged craft. Is that what got you going for this week's show?
Without a doubt.
Yeah. What do
Because
you?
many of these specifically happen in the Pacific. Say
Yeah,
that 3 times fast. Right?
yeah. Right. You know, in my backyard here, so many stories. What do you? Just let me ask you. What do you think? What do you think is going on? Let's say, I'll frame the question this way: the objects are real, right?
Hmm.
400 miles per hour, and these different, incidents. Um, do you think they are us or them?
Why not both?
I'm asking you.
No,
That's
I'm
now you're
kind of
throwing it. You're throwing the
I'm
question back.
I'm answering the question with a question mark at the end.
Yeah,
Why not both?
my mom used to say, "Never trust anybody who answers a question with a question."
Okay,
They're
don't give people
avoiding the answer.
ideas,
They're
Jimmy.
avoiding the answer.
See, no, I am just being inquisitive here of why not both? Like that commercial, porque no los dos? And it was like a taco, a crispy taco commercial. It's
Okay,
like one of my favorites. Just
okay.
like that.
I haven't seen the commercial, but I'll take your word for it.
Oh, it's
The
funny.
but if the capabilities that have been reported, what you have the resistance of water and other things, 400 miles per hour is way beyond our known laws of physics, right? And that takes things to another level. And I would say it would have to be them. If the evidence, if what is being reported is accurate, that ain't us, Christina. How could it be?
Especially when we're looking at cases from the 1930s, 1940s, maybe into the 1960s, it's very hard to say that the things that are being seen are ours. Now, in 2025, there are still reports of witnesses seeing strange things enter and exit the water. And really, I feel like we're living in the future. 2025 is the future. We should be having that kind of equipment, but it should be made public, right? So I
Could
think
be,
today it's,
could be Aquaman.
you know what?
Could be
Why
Aquaman.
not?
And what about and then we'll get into these specific cases. But what if we, do a little bit of a dive into things like Atlantis and undersea cities that have been talked about, and how many cultures over the years in deep history have talked about not only objects but people coming out of the sea and the ocean and walking up on shore, apparently coming from nowhere. And then, you know what, mermaids, right? Mermen. You can't, let's talk about the mermen and the possibility of this, because and we're gonna I'd like to start with Lake Baikal, because the Soviet military has commented about Baikal, and when they are looking at the technology and what they have encountered there, they're like, well, it ain't us. And we don't have that kind of technology. And what is being reported, we don't have any idea, but we've got to investigate this, because these capabilities are something that we can't do here with the Soviet Navy. Now, the Russian Navy, of course, but yeah, I think we have to take a hard look at that. Could it be something where the Soviet Navy, the Russian Navy, has, how do I say this? I want to say this correctly. I don't want to misquote anything here, but here's a quote. One Russian officer said 50% of UFO encounters are connected with oceans. 15% more above that 50% number are connected with lakes. So UFOs tend to stick with water, end quote. Now, isn't that a very specific statement? You know what I mean? What is going on? And how many times have we heard eyewitness testimony going back into ancient history? By the way, this is before um the internet. Reports of craft with tubes, pipes hanging out and sucking up water at riverbanks, at lakes, in oceans, which goes through to today. But Christina, it's nothing new here. And could water be that important? Well, yeah, water's life, right?
That's
Could it
right.
be the propulsion system? I don't know, but these reports have been going on what seems like forever.
They have, and they go back centuries. Now, over the last about 7 decades, there have been more sufficient cases, but you wanted to touch on Lake Baikal first, so let's go there. And the most famous case that took place there was in the summer of 1982, where this is the world's deepest freshwater lake. Even though it's in Russia, it is the world's deepest freshwater lake. And according to accounts attributed to a declassified Soviet intelligence report, 7 military divers training at 50 meters depth encountered 3 humanoid figures, approximately 9 feet tall, wearing silvery suits with transparent dome like helmets. And then, when the divers reportedly attempted to capture one of these beings, because that's what humans do, An entity pointed a small device at them, creating a powerful whirlpool that forced them rapidly to the surface. Now, this is very dangerous for divers because that sudden ascent caused severe decompression sickness, resulting in 3 divers passing away and injuring the remaining 4. And the situation just worsened by a defective decompression chamber. So they could only fit so many divers in that decompression chamber at a time. So that's why there were 3 divers that didn't make it, while 4 did. And this story was buried for quite a few years until I believe it was a Russian ufologer who really brought it out back into the public. And it has been looked at, it's been spoken about ever since then. And yet, this is a case where there are very similar patterns around the world. When I had Swedish researcher Fred Anderson on the show yesterday, he had also mentioned that there are reports of strange entities that are also divers and that meet other people in the water, either trying to communicate with them or pushing them out of the way of like, hey, you cannot trespass to this area of the lake, of the ocean, and so on. So, this particular case is very famous in Russia. It's a well-known one, and it's very strange on how these creatures were depicted. They were slightly humanoid, but there have been folklore wrapped around this encounter in Lake Baikal that they have like shark heads and human bodies, and then others say it's just pure humanoid alien beings. So the stories change a little bit on the depiction of how these scuba diver entities look, but it has been also nicely wrapped in a bow within Russian folklore as well.
Mermen. They were mermen. But okay, so in 1982, when that encounter happened, it wasn't just that specific encounter with other beings with the glass helmets on. They also saw and reported on a fast moving underwater vehicle too, as well. And so you combine that with all of the data that the Russian Navy has declassified about UFO encounters during the Cold War, but a significant part of that data release were UFOs, USOs that were these incidents were taking place in or near water. And a huge amount of those cases in the declassified documents were Lake Baikal. Now, let me throw a couple of quotes at you. As these documents were poured over, a couple of Russian officers, I gave you one quote already, but were quoted in the investigations that were taking place. All right. Now, here's a quote. You ready?
Mhm.
Quote: on several occasions, the instruments gave reading of material objects moving at incredible speed. Calculations showed speeds of about 230 knots or 400 kilometers per hour. Speeding so fast is a challenge even on the surface, but water resistance is much higher. It was like the objects defied the laws of physics. There's only one explanation: the creatures who built them far surpass us in development. End quote. That's powerful. Soviet scientists exploring the depths of the lake. Remember, it's the deepest freshwater lake in the world. At 50 meters or 150 feet, that is anybody that dives will tell you when you go through and get your training, 150 feet is max. That's max. You go any deeper than 150 feet, you're running into trouble. Now you have to wear a special dive suit. and take very, very, very major steps to protect yourself. So 150 feet with a tank and everything else, that is max. That's as deep as you can go. These creatures came up from below them, Christina. They were
Dun,
below
dun,
that.
dun.
Yeah, they were below that 150-foot depth. And those Soviet scientists that were exploring the lake's depths reported seeing an unexplained light source from below after shutting off their submersible's external lights. Now, what I just explained to everybody, if you're a diver, you're in a suit, you got a tank, 150 feet. Below that, special diving suit or a submersible. A submarine, a typical submarine in a Navy, has a crush depth of around 500 feet. So when you hear about a submarine going below 500 feet, I'm talking about attack submarines in the United States Navy. 500 feet past that, you've got a special advanced submarine to avoid being crushed at 500 feet. A submersible, like what they took down to the Titanic, and we hear about these all the time, they can go past 2,000 feet, 2,500 feet, and even much deeper than that. But these are rare. There's only a couple on the planet that can go down to 10,000 feet. So for a Russian submersible with scientists on it down at that depth, and they turn off their lights and they see lights below them, they know these are impossible numbers. So what is at the bottom of Lake Baikal? It's the hardest thing to investigate. It's the hardest thing to get to. All we have to do is talk about James Cameron and the Titanic and how rare, right, of an event that is. And the other part is, if we can't get there, then it's a great place to hide, isn't it?
Dun, dun, dun.
Absolutely.
Yes, it is. I have a case that I found really interesting that took place in 1952 called Operation Mainbrace. And this was encountered by a large NATO military exercise. And it was actually one of the biggest ones since World War II. And there were multiple UFO sightings that occurred across the North Atlantic. So this massive operation involved 200 ships, 1,000 planes, 80,000 soldiers from various NATO countries, and they were simulating a response to a potential Soviet attack on Europe. And earlier that year, a series of flying saucer sightings were over Washington, D.C., because this is 1952, and it had made global headlines during that time. So, half jokingly, Pentagon officers told naval intelligence to watch for aliens during the NATO exercises, not expecting any unusual encounters or sightings of any kind. And this was also reported by Edward Ruppelt. Keep that in mind. So the first encounter came on September 13th, 1952, when the crew of a Danish destroyer spotted a triangular shaped object moving through the night sky at practically impossible speeds. And then Lieutenant Commander Schmidt Jensen estimated the blue glowing craft was traveling at around 900 miles per hour. Then, a week later, on September 20th, American newspaper reporter Wallace Litwin aboard the USS Franklin D. Roosevelt says he photographed a silver sphere that appeared to be following the fleet, according to the History Channel, like history.com. And despite initially assuming it was a weather balloon, ship officers confirmed no balloon had been released that day from any of the vessels in the area. Now, the most significant sighting actually took place on September 19th in Yorkshire, England, as a British Meteor fighter jet was returning to the airfield, and ground crew spotted a silvery circular object several thousand feet above the plane, but following its trajectory. So similar to the Tic Tac into that with the Nimitz encounter. Then you had Flight Lieutenant, a part of the 269 Squadron, who reported that the object descended toward the jets, similar to a fallen leaf, which is an interesting description, and then suddenly stopped midair, rotating on its axis, and accelerated away at a speed in excess of that of a shooting star. So you have back to back to back all these different sightings all happening during the NATO exercise. Within a week, you have 80,000 people there. You have, so many planes, you have so many ships. And funny enough, Pentagon officers were like, hey, just keep an eye out for UFOs. And then Ruppelt had also commented on that as well, of strange things were really happening during that time frame. And it's also mentioned here that the British Air Ministry also received some of these reports, especially from the one that took place off the coast of Yorkshire. And they just put it in the archives. Like, they didn't really know what to do with it. But from what we know, 1952 was a very hot year for UFO sightings, really from 47 to like 62. If I had to take a guess of a year timeline, that had to be where we got some of the most significant UFO sightings.
Main brace, if you look at the reports from main brace, a thick book could be written. So much stuff happened, so many reports, on and off the record. We're talking about the military here, and main brace was crazy. Main brace was absolutely nuts. I have read and checked out so many different investigations into main brace over the years, and it's absolutely incredible. I don't know what was going through everybody's minds at that time, because this is 1952. It was day after day after day after day. They were being followed. They were being harassed by these objects in and out of the water, lit up, silver, every size, shape, speed, every type of trajectory that you can imagine was happening in and around and during main brace. It's one of the craziest. It's nearly a flap, and it was just a NATO exercise, right? It wasn't over a 5-year period or a summer over a city in the United States. This was the Navy with their very own UFO flap right there in the North Atlantic. It was absolutely incredible. And anybody can go and research it. It's in many books.
It is. And it's one that I had seen before, but I didn't investigate it well enough. And then for today's show, I thought this is actually an extraordinary case we have to cover because it's very appropriate for today's topic. And not only that, this was a NATO exercise. You're dealing with so many different countries, so many different people getting involved and seeing these strange things in the sky being reported, as I had mentioned, over the days for about a week. Pretty cool
Now,
stuff.
yeah, and Richard Dolan writes about it extensively, and so does Donald Kehoe, and a few other authors and researchers, and it's in many books. It's just a great case. Now I have a gift for you.
And
You
what is
ready?
that?
It's got a
Yes.
bow on it. It's got a bow.
Nice.
Here is a case that is extraordinary. And I remember getting, this is William Cooper, Bill Cooper. And for anybody out there that wants to really just have a pretty amazing time, you can go and listen to Bill Cooper's radio show, and everything is there. And he talks about this case on the show, but it's also in his book, Pale Horse. But the case itself, when I first read about it, was in the early 90s. And now I guess, okay, it was 30 years ago, probably 35 years ago that I read about this case. But it was also putting the historical stuff to the side for a moment. It was one of the first cases that I started to investigate and look into that involved craft that were coming in and out of the water with the United States Navy with a cover up tied around it. So the case itself is extraordinary, and you can go and look it up. But let me give you the rundown. It happened in 1966. Cooper's in the Navy, and he's on board a submarine, the USS Tiru. That's Tiru. If anybody wants to go and look that up, it was a diesel electric submarine, not a nuclear submarine. And Cooper himself was acting as the port lookout during a transit near Seattle, the Seattle Portland area of the Pacific. And it was during what was supposed to be routine duty for him that he witnessed the event. And this is what happened. He says that a massive metallic disc comparable to the size of a Midway class aircraft carrier, okay, emerged from the ocean. And he said that bubbling, he's in the tower right there. You can see it. He's up on top of the submarine. Submarine is on the surface. He's up there with his binoculars, right? He's a lookout. Water starts bubbling, starts acting funny, catches his eye, and it's right next to the submarine. And this giant craft, and it's a disc, he describes it, the size of an aircraft carrier, tilts up and comes out and ascends into the air. And then he says it started to, even though it was an aircraft carrier sized disc, he describes it, Christina, as tumbling as it goes up and then disappears into the clouds. Okay. Now he's freaking out. He's looking for other stuff to come out of the water. He's looking up in the sky. He's got his binoculars, but there were multiple crew people up on top with him, just like you see. Blow up this photograph a little bit. Zoom in for us. Now go up to the conning tower, go up to the top. See all those crew members up there? That's what was going on. So, yeah. So he's up there with a bunch of other officers. Shortly after, Cooper says, the same craft or a similar craft came down out of the clouds, repeated the tumbling maneuver, and then re-entered the ocean. Cooper said he was shocked that the water seemed to open up and part for the craft before it went into the water. Yeah. And he said it was seamless. It was just all very smooth. The water knew the craft was coming down. It opens up, craft submerges. And he said he was expecting some violent, splash. This is a giant craft, but the water just closed in behind it and just returned back to normal ocean. How crazy is that? Right? Now, if the submarine, I've got more. If the submarine wasn't there, if it was maybe sonar would have detected something, maybe not, I don't know. But if they weren't there at the right place at the right time, nobody would have seen anything. Now, the sighting, like I mentioned, was observed by multiple crew members, including the officer of the deck. Another lookout was with them. A chief quartermaster on board up in the conning tower had a camera with him and took multiple photographs of everything, of the entire event. He says that, and he's talked about this many times over the years. He said that after the incident, they continue on across the Pacific and they head to Hawaii and they pull into Pearl Harbor and they dock. He said that the crew was immediately debriefed by a commander from Naval Intelligence. Of course, right? Of course. I don't know if he was dressed in black or not. Each crew member was instructed to maintain complete silence about what they had witnessed under penalty of severe legal and financial consequences. Cooper said that, and it really freaked him out. It really freaked him out. He said that they were warned that any discussion of the event would include imprisonment, fines, and loss of all pay and allowances. Now, you're in the Navy and you're told that, you're already broke. Okay? You are. You're broke. You're broke. You're not making any money. And you get that laid on you? No, 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 no. And that's one of the techniques that they use. Now, what about the photographs? You were going to ask me about that, right?
Of course I was. What about the photographs, Jimmy?
I'm glad you asked about that, Cristina, because
Thank you, Jimmy.
the photographs that were taken during the sighting, of course, were confiscated. And the crew was not allowed to leave the submarine for shore leave. Now, remember what I just mentioned about money and pay. One of the things you use that money on when you're in the Navy, you dock, you go hit the bars, right? With you and your buddies. You're off the submarine. You're on dry land. You go, and that's what you do. You rest and relax. It's R&R, right? They weren't allowed to leave the submarine. They had to stay on board. There's an interview that Bill Cooper did. I think I could be wrong, but you can look it up. I think it was with CNN back in the day, like CNN in 1992. It's a great interview. And in that interview, he recounts this case specifically. There's a lot of detail about this case with photographs of Cooper in the Navy and on board the Tyru in his book, Behold a Pale Horse. And you can go and check that out too as well. But this is one of those cases that really got me into USOs and the idea of submerged, unidentified objects being out there. But the ocean is just so big. It's so big. And unless you're looking, I have, I've been on the ocean a lot. When you're out to sea and you look around and there's nothing there, it's nothing but ocean, and you're the only boat to the horizon, and you have this feeling of tininess, how tiny you are. You know what I mean? And because it's so big and so massive, and you look down into the darkness and the depths of the ocean, and you just wonder to yourself, what's there? You're thinking about whales, right? You know what I mean? You're thinking about all of the wonderful creatures that are down there, dolphins, sharks, right? All that stuff, stingrays, tuna, right? And you think about UFOs, or is there a submarine below? Yeah, you just think about all of that because it's so massive. And if something is over there and it pops out of the ocean and breaks the surface, right? Breaks the water, breaks the surface, unless If you're looking over, you never see it.
That's
Do
right,
you
because it doesn't
understand?
make any sounds.
Yeah, it's just so big. I've seen stuff jump out of the ocean. I've seen whales, I've seen dolphins, I've seen stingrays, break the surface. But the only reason why I have seen it or anybody else that sees is you have to be looking at that instant because it's just for a second or two. And it's the same thing with USOs. Unless you're looking in that direction, you're not going to see it. It's a great place to hide, Christina. Maybe the best on planet Earth.
Oh, most definitely. As our planet is a water world, so much of it has not been explored. It is monster soup because a bunch of weird critters down there. It is the best place to hide. Our technology can only go so deep. It can only withstand the pressure so deep. And
Did you
we
say
don't.
did you say monster soup?
Oh, yes. Our
I
ocean
love
is
that.
monster soup.
I love that. Can
Yeah.
I steal
Thank you.
that? Did you steal that from somebody?
Take it.
Is
It
it
is now
yours?
yours. I
Okay.
have gifted it to you.
That's mine
It's
now.
for everyone to use because it is true.
Monster
It is
soup.
a fact. The ocean
Monster
is
soup.
monster soup. Mm. But to get back to your point, it is a brilliant place to hide. There's a lot of theories and ideas that there are underwater bases there. Representative Tim Burchett even spoke about that on the Matt Gates show just a few months ago, where he has been told by others that they have seen football field craft moving at incredible speeds underwater, and that there are even bases underwater as well, because as you had mentioned, it would be a great place to hide. But something else I want to talk about is that you had mentioned that when these craft enter and exit the water, they don't make a sound, they don't make a splash. And so if you're not looking at the right place at the right time, you're going to miss it. It the first thing I thought of is a lot of the times when people have UFO sightings, or they're just casually outside, taking out the trash, enjoying nature, whatever, they almost get this little tap on the shoulder of, hey, look up right now to your right. And then when they do, they see something strange. We can probably apply that same pattern structure to these USOs. Those that have seen them have either gotten incredibly lucky, or they were casually tapped on the shoulder saying, "Hey, you should look over there." And then you fall on the ground crying, either out of excitement or fear, depending on who you are.
Do you remember
But I
Christopher Columbus? We haven't talked about this and we haven't mentioned it in a while. I think we've talked about it before, but in his journal, in the ship's logs, he comes over and he mentions, and I love the debunkers on this, in the ship's logs, that he thought he had finally seen mermaids. Okay. And then he also talks about lights in the water. Now, you go back to 1492, okay,
when
500
Columbus
years
sailed the
ago.
ocean blue.
Absolutely. 500 years ago, lights under the water. What could that be? Now, the debunkers today go, well, he was probably seeing manatees.
Yeah.
Well, you weren't there. You weren't there. But what if he was seeing something similar to what was witnessed in Lake Baiku? Right? I don't know if we have time to get to Puerto Rico because I would love to cover Japan next. This case from Japan is absolutely nuts. But there have been accounts of things that are humanoid that swim in the ocean. And I don't know. It makes me think. And then you go back to Columbus, somebody that, a captain of an armada of ships. He's got three, right? Um, Out on the ocean for as long as he had been, that he knows what he's seen everything. Why are you going to write, hey man, check this out. Today I saw mermaids for the first time. What? You know what I mean? What
I do.
was it that I would think he would know what a manatee is, or some kind a sea lion, or you know what I mean? But he wrote mermaids. And then the lights, of course, in the water was always very interesting to me.
That's such a great example to bring up Christopher Columbus with the things that he wrote down, being an explorer, having which we would assume he would have a trained eye in these things. And the things that he wrote about mermaids, about these candle lights going in and out of the water, of course, not only sparks curiosity in us, but also of did he really write what he was seeing, or was he just drinking a little bit too much that day? Right, because when we're looking at that time frame as well, there usually wasn't fresh water on those boats. The
Well, I
liquids
don't
that
know.
they would drink were fermented, because that
Yeah,
could
yeah, it's a
last
good
the
point.
weeks, the months they were on sea. They didn't have water, they didn't have orange juice. They had beer. Like,
But
that was it.
ship's logs and the captain's journal, this is a tradition of absolute accuracy. Something happens to the ship, right? Whatever, they go and they get the ship's logs and they can go through and see what happened at what time. You know, it's very accurate. Mermaids? What was it that he saw? You know, to have that logged and written about is very, very, very interesting to me. Oh, and you combine that with the lights. And where did he see this? In the Caribbean off the coast of Florida. Yeah, as
Which
he
we
was
know
approaching land.
is a hotspot.
Not the Bermuda Triangle, of course, but at that point in their journey, right, crossing the Atlantic, searching for the New World, very accurate details of everything: the land, the islands, depth, you know, rocks. You don't want to crash and sink a boat for other expeditions that are coming in behind you. You are logging everything very accurately. So, what was it that Christopher Columbus saw? Now, man, how do we always run out of time? I like the historical stuff. We can talk about what's going off the coast of Catalina. We have the Nimitz, we have the Roosevelt, we have the recent drone activity off of the coast of Catalina. Yes, right. But when you go into the historical stuff, that to me is some of the most intriguing, just like we were just talking about Bill Cooper from 1966. This case, and if you research it, you may get some misspellings of the name of the boat, which is the Kitsukawa Maru. Now, the most commonly used spelling for this is Kitsukawa Maru, Maru. Now, this took place in 1957. And lots of investigation has gone into this. There are a lot of quotes, but I will summarize it this way and then hand it off to you, Christina. I'm sure you have some additional details. The boat was sailing off the coast of Yokohama with a 5-man crew, and this was April 19th, 1957. How do we know? The ship's logs. Okay. All right. According to the ship's logs, all hands on the boat saw the sudden appearance of not one, but two silver saucer shaped metal craft plunge into the water next to their boat. Immediately afterward, the sea where they fell and entered the water became disturbed. It was boiling, it was bubbling, and it was churning. They described it as violent. Okay. The objects, Christina, check this, were estimated to be 30 feet long without wings of any kind. The crewmen then turned the boat and searched for wreckage, but found nothing. Now, this is important because they thought the reason why they said no wings, because they thought they were seeing a plane or two planes crash. All right. And as they looked and witnessed this, they realized that there wasn't any wings or any noise. So, in the ship's logs and in the reporting with officials, once they got to shore, they said, "Hey, we thought it was an airplane, but there were no wings. There wasn't anything there." It was absolutely nuts. The ocean went crazy. This is how big they were. They were silver, they were metallic. There was two of them, but they weren't airplanes. Now, remember, this is 1957. So what was it? What do you think they witnessed, Christina?
From their description alone, it sounds like it could have been a UFO. I mean, probably not a meteorite, because of the description that was given to them. And also, this case was written in Jacques Vallée's book, Anatomy of a Phenomenon, and in another book by Ivan Sanderson called Invincible Residents as well. Really talking about not only this case, but as you had mentioned, Jimmy, also the slight variation name titling of like how it was spelled.
Yep.
But something else that's worth mentioning here is that this was attempted to be explained away in 1957. People said it must have been a meteorite. It must have been secret military technology. But to this day, those explanations are merely theories. None of them were conclusions because, as those men that saw this crash into the water, there was no wreckage whatsoever. If it was a meteorite, you would find hopefully something at the very least at the bottom of the ocean. And if it was secret military technology, well, that's a different thing altogether. That where it gets a little dicey. But this case is a very interesting one. Japan has a lot of UFO cases, and when we're looking at UFOs and water, Japan would be one of the best places to have a UFO sighting. Not only is it a beautiful tourist destination with great food, maybe aliens are really into that, but also it is surrounded by water. So that would be a great place for them to hide as well.
Well, it's also the Japanese origin story. That's the other crazy part. The Japanese culture, they came from outer space. How many times?
I haven't heard that.
Oh,
I've heard about
yeah.
the Native Americans in the US.
No. Japan. Aliens.
What?
Yeah,
I'll have
yeah.
to look at that.
Yeah. Quote me. Look it up. Take a picture. Yeah, absolutely. But remember, I know that we've done 3 or 4 different ancient UFO stories and encounters in and around Japan. But when you look into their deep history, it's really funny to me where they don't have any issues about an encounter and just laying it out like it, she had red hair. There was strange writing on the ship. The craft came out of the ocean and we locked her, and then we sent her back out to sea because she freaked us out. Cases like that in Japan go back for 1 and 2,000 years.
Well, definitely the culture is very different. And during that time frame, looking at the 1800s into the early 1900s, a lot of them really followed the Shinto tradition where everything had life in it. Rocks, water, grass, and you could pray to all of them, praise all of them. So this idea of aliens isn't really that far-fetched from that kind of mentality where people go to certain mountains to go and pray to them, to pray to the gods and to the demons that are there as well, the guardians. So for something to come from a different planet into Japan, when people have that mentality of the Shinto tradition and ideology, it's like, oh yeah, just another day. But nothing really too strange about that compared to other cultures in different parts of the world that are a bit more rigid in their ideas. The Japanese seem pretty relaxed about it.
All right, here's my take, and I'm looking at the clock as we wind this down. And everybody, great show today, great show. This started about 5 or 6 years ago, right around the TTSA Nimitz stuff. But there were reports that were starting to surface in the community from different researchers that the United States Navy has two, let's just call them alien bases, identified, one in the Pacific and one in the Atlantic. And they know from, I'm just going to say, communication and transmissions of entry and exit points at a very specific location in the Atlantic, a very specific location in the Pacific, and they monitor these craft entering and exiting at these 2 points. And I would say this, my answer to that is, of course. Why? Jimmy, you just said the ocean's a big place. And yeah, but we have satellites over everything. And we are able to triangulate and pinpoint different spots if we need to. And if craft are entering and exiting the ocean at the same place with regularity, then we would know, and we would have ships out there, and we would be watching this activity, and submarines below the surface monitoring this too as well. Where there's smoke, there's fire. I believe that there is something to this. I think that we know exactly, when I say we, the Department of Defense knows exactly where these 2 bases are. There's been talk about the Marianas Trench and these very, very deep locations. We have one of those trenches off the coast of California near Catalina Island. There's one near Puerto Rico. We've got 2 deep trenches in the Pacific and 2 extremely deep trenches in the Atlantic. And it's beyond our capabilities to get to those depths, but we can see stuff enter and exit the surface of the water. And I would say we know exactly where this is going on. I think that there's one other base. I haven't talked about this, but I think there's one in the Gulf of Baja. Yeah. Yep.
Nice place to be.
Yeah. If you look at the Gulf of Baja, the panhandle that comes down below California, ends at Cabo, right? Go into the Gulf behind there and go to Google Maps and tell me, go to Google Earth, that you don't see a giant airport. It's 100 miles, 50 miles wide. I've looked at this and pored over this for years. Nobody really wants to talk about it, but I got to say, if that's an ancient airport under the water, if there is one, that's where it is. Go and look at it. After the show today, Cristina, Gulf of California, Google Earth, zoom in and look, and you're going to go, what? Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. And some will say that viewing something like that, as many have with Google Earth, all over the planet looking for stuff under the water, that it's a sonar anomaly. All right, it's a mapping anomaly. Well, that looks pretty specific to me.
That's like the ocean version of swamp gas.
Yeah, kind of. Everybody, thank you so much. Before I get out of here, tonight on the show, Stephen Bassett is going to be with us on Fade to Black. So if you'd like to join us, come and check that out. We'll be talking about the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance and what it is, what they are doing, who's in it, what's the objective, And then we'll get an update on Washington, D.C., and the latest with UFOs and UAPs on Capitol Hill. Cristina, great show. Thanks. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you enjoyed the show, hit that like button right down below and subscribe if you haven't already, as I do several shows right here every single week. And make sure to hit that notification bell. I've been getting a lot of comments recently that people are being unsubscribed and they're not getting the notification. So make sure to check those two things before you head out. Also, check out ufonews.co. That is my website where I write articles, but also it is an aggregate. So anytime UFOs are mentioned in the news, it'll show up right there. That is it for today. I will see you next time. Be safe, and remember, keep your eyes on the skies. If you enjoy the strange and the mysterious, UFOs, the paranormal, and cryptids, this channel is for you. So make sure to subscribe, as I do 3 videos right here every single week, and hit that notification bell so you do not miss any of the bonus content I post right here.